And okay, so you think about that for a second. Does somebody at work care about me as a person? Well, if I'm the leader and I don't care about them and they don't believe that or they don't see that, well, they're just not going to be engaged.
Well, hi, Bryan. Welcome to Passion and Profits. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Glad to be here, Jacob.
So, Bryan, you are an entrepreneur and you are someone who I can safely say is an expert at being a leader because you've built some businesses, made a lot of money, and done so in a way that has seems to have created this great culture based on love, which I think is sort of counterculture to maybe what we think of traditionally as, building a business in America. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to some degree, I'm glad you added this sort of last part there because having a team or making money certainly don't make you a good leader. There's a lot of people that have both that I would say are very poor leaders. And and there's some of the more known examples. Your Steve Jobs isn't exactly known as a loving, caring person, but certainly had a lot of money and certainly was successful by a lot of standards. And so, when I look at leadership, it's certainly a lot more than just, hey, am I successful? And certainly want to be, certainly have goals. That's not part of the equation, but it's not the underlying most important part. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious though, how did you come to this way of thinking with so many prolific examples of people who don't do that traditionally for leaders and entrepreneurs? How did you come to this way of thinking and this approach to your business?
Yeah, so I'll give you an initial story that stands out in my mind that happened to me when I was in college. There was a presenter that came to college. His name was Steve Dickerson, and he was a really interesting, dynamic guy. Not an entrepreneur. He was worked for various companies in the auto industry, and one of them he worked for did brake manufacturing, and their facility in the Carolinas was getting shut down in 2 years. He had a 2-year heads up. Nothing he could do was going to get shut down. And he tells this story to a bunch of engineers who could potentially work at facilities like this, that he had this information and he now had to decide what to do with it. Do you wait till 2 weeks before it's going to shut down and tell everybody, hey, it's your last 2 weeks, see you later? Do you tell them sooner and hope they don't quit ahead of time and just leave and now you don't have a plant to run? Because that was his responsibility to keep that plant running. And so ultimately he talked about how his leadership team got together and said, you know what, we're going to tell everybody and we're going to let them know, we're going to help them. And so when it shut down, they worked the entire 2 years, shut down, everybody either had a retirement plan or they had transferred and had a new job somewhere else. And so I heard that story as an engineer and said, man, I love engineering and this is great, but this is really a way to affect people. And so that really inspired me to say, how can I do that in my life? How could I have that impact in as large of a scale, if that's the right word or the right strategy to see it? And then over time, it developed as a better understanding of, I think that resonated with me because partially because of my faith, right? So what do I mean by that? Love is a core part of what I'm required to do in my faith. The simplest answer is, as a Christian, Jesus talks about love one another. And I think that actually gets ignored quite a bit, right? To love your neighbor as yourself, which means quite often I have to put their needs ahead of mine. And so that kind of made it very real to me. Okay, if you really love somebody, what does that mean? The definition that I work off of is to will the good of another. So I'll kind of pause for a second, maybe repeat that. To will the good of another. So I think most of the people that are listening that you work with, Jacob, do that and live that, right? Another word that's often used is charity, and they're kind of used interchangeably at times. Yeah. And that one makes sense. What's charity? That would mean doing something without expectation, doing something good without expectation of return. And that's essentially the same thing as how I would understand love. And so when you realize that, okay, I personally have to live this out. That's my belief system that's under girding what I am as a person, and see that, you know what, this really inspiring story of someone that could have just tried to do the profitable, easy thing, but didn't, says, okay, there's a way to be successful in business, but also care for people and love them. Does that help or make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and certainly is in line with my values. In Five Bridges, the fifth bridge is give, and we talk a lot about this idea of why we give, and it's interesting because the law of reciprocity and what this does psychologically is really impactful and deep for us as individuals. So that definition of love fits right and perfectly in that. And I think what strikes me the most about it is that me giving love is not for me. It is for you, right? Willing the good for you.
Right.
And I think that's a really important definition. So I appreciate you sharing that story. And it's something that I think is lost so often in the business space. So how then did that develop into what is now a couple of successful companies?
Yeah. So the question of how to develop into companies, I don't know that the love or the goal to build the company around that made the company itself, right? It was more of, okay, I see an opportunity to impact people. Being in business is a great way to do that. So I acquired my first business at 26 and had 12 employees. So now it was like, okay, I'd never managed anybody. Now all of a sudden I'm thrown into this to some degree. I got to figure out how to resonate and connect with people.
Mm-hmm.
And the summary there is you just have to care about people. And what does that look like? It's like literally asking them. One of the resources that I've used for, maybe it's 12, 15 years now, is a book called First Break All the Rules by Marcus Buckingham. It's a really great resource. You can certainly reach out to me if you don't want to read the book. There's 12 questions in there that are based on 20 plus years of research, 80,000 interviews, I think 20,000 managers. And these 12 questions can predict profitability and retention. And so I actually think the two are very related. And some of the questions are things like, hey, does someone at work care about me as a person? Right? And, okay, so you think about that for a second. Does somebody at work care about me as a person? Well, if I'm the leader and I don't care about them and they don't believe that or they don't see that, well, they're just not going to be engaged. They're going to quiet quit or they're going to do the bare minimum not to get fired and these types of things. But on the other side, I recently had a newer team member come to me and say, Bryan, it's really interesting in like meetings and stuff. You never actually tell people exactly tell them or order them what to do. Like, why is that? He was very surprised because that seems like what you should do and what you need to do.
Sure.
And you have to have systems in place so people know what's expected, right? Like what's a good quality and so on. It's not vague. But the idea that people have to step up and say, hey, I'm going to take on that project or I'm going to deal with that situation or I'm going to do these things works when everybody buys into we're on the same team.
Yeah.
Right. And so over the next few months, once I pointed out that it's like, I don't have to tell people what to do because they want to be part of it. And different people on our team, so in my marketing agency, have different skill sets. And so when a problem comes up that's uniquely fit for them, that they know they have the skill set and we rely on them to solve that kind of problem, that's just a part of the group. I don't want to use the word family because I don't think it's fair to call it that because that's different, but it's just part of the organization where they know they're expected to and people are relying on them to do well and they'll get appreciated for it and they'll get recognized for it. And so they do. And so the idea that you have to say, hey, you handle this or you handle that isn't necessary when we're all moving in the same direction and buy into the same trust of each other. Like another one of the questions is, do I believe my coworkers are doing quality work? Right. And so that feeds right into that. if I don't think they're doing quality work, I might be afraid to hand something off to somebody. Well, how are you going to scale or
Yeah.
grow or do anything along those lines if you can't trust the other people you're with?
Right. Or feel like it's okay for you to do subpar work if everyone else is doing it.
Yeah, sure. Yep,
Right.
yep. There's certainly pressure on that.
Yeah. And I think it's, I like the differentiation, between not using the word family, but what you're describing sounds like community. It sounds like this group of people who are coming together for the good of all, and towards a common goal, and participating as necessary to accomplish that goal. But the leadership necessary to create the vision and make sure that the goals and the standards are translated. I mean, that falls to you, right? That's your design
Sure.
for the organization. So when you are putting that plan in place and when you're strategizing for, really trying to accomplish the objectives of your business and, of course, make money and provide valuable service, how much time are you spending on, your SOPs versus, how you're building that culture? How do you strike that balance? Because I find for myself, it feels like sometimes resources are so limited that I have to sacrifice the people part of it to focus on, the business part.
Yeah. So two things kind of inspired me, or at least a few things that I would say. One is you get the people you deserve. I heard that years ago. And what does that mean? That like if you have staffing problems, it's leadership's fault. Period. Right? Like the buck stops there. And so, okay, if you get the people you deserve, then how do you get the best people? And that's where the culture is necessary to get the best people, particularly when you have limited resources. Right? The number one reason people leave companies is because of their relationship with their direct report. It's not pay or perks or all these other things. Like it's the relationship with the direct report. So if you're C-level and there's somebody that's 3 levels down from you, it's not necessarily you, but it's the team that you've built, the culture you've built around them. And the other thing is an organization reflects, in a business world, the founder, but the leader. And so if I'm saying I care and I love, care about people and I love them, I will the good of them, I want the best for them, and they're in a high stress situation and I don't recognize that and help them in whatever way I can, like giving me an extra break, bringing them lunch, or there's so many things you do, or just asking and talking to them, like, hey, what's going on? What can we do better? Getting their input, getting their feedback. One of the other questions that comes up with Buckingham's research is, do my opinions at work seem to count? Well, that doesn't mean they're followed. That means they're listened to, right? And so, okay, if you're building this business or your organization and you want the best people, and it's you're the one responsible ultimately for that, how do you balance out the culture versus the operations? I think the first operating procedure you need is your culture statements, right? Like you have to define what is the culture we're building. So if I'm making SOPs, that's the first one. We have 6 of them in Optimized Marketing, and they've evolved over the years, to be fair. So originally, I think we started out with 11. And so we've kind of trimmed those down, simplified them, and tried to get to ones that are memorable. And then we actually, on a semi-annual basis, we do what's called a peer assessment. We take those values, and then in the group that you're connected with, so it's generally 6 to 10 people on the high end that you would normally interface with, you rate them anonymously on where they're at on these core values that everybody agrees to. And so that starts right at the recruiting phase. So if I don't have that at the beginning, how am I going to know that I'm going to get somebody that's culturally aligned or someone that really believes it can be part of, or you use community, which I think is a great one, because I haven't defined who the community is or what the community is or where we're going or whatnot. Right. So that becomes foundational. Once you start building the team, you got to have the quality controls and systems in place. That's true of any business, in any industry or nonprofit. I mean, it doesn't matter. And initially, I was probably doing the majority of those. I mean, dozens, if not hundreds, in the first few years. Now I do very few of them because the team understands the importance of these things, and that's just the nature of sort of a startup or a growing company. That initially you got to do everything, and then over time,
Right.
if you have people that buy into the vision, they'll continue to do those things. Does that make sense or answer your question?
Yeah, and I think what I'm struck by is the level of autonomy and you being an example, but effectively you are then looking to them to self-manage in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and you got to be really careful with that because people use that self-manage to say, "Oh, you're on your own, figure it out," right? And that
I've been
I
guilty
think
of that,
has a
Brian.
negative. There's the pendulum, right?
Yeah,
Like you can swing it too far. I think Dan Pink's research, where he talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose, I think speaks to that you need autonomy, but you also need. We would see it in the marketing world. Like, if I have a challenge, can I go talk to a world class expert to help me with this? And our team has that. We do
Hmm.
daily check-ins, and it's worth mentioning. All of my teams are remote, so I got people spread across probably 6 countries and probably right now 4 different states. And so when that's the case, and I don't look at people and see them day to day, you have to have a lot of checks to check in with people and to make sure things are going well. And short meetings, we do
Yeah,
a 15-minute stand up with the core team, every day to see what barriers they might have and so on. And those types of things show that, okay, I'm autonomous. I can go solve these problems in my own way. However, if you're new, you're going to be provided with a way to solve almost every problem. There's got to be an operating procedure. There's got to be a solution. There's got to be something, and you can add to it or you can make it better. But I'm a
yeah,
data-driven guy. You better have the data and be able to have the proof to show it's better. And if so, then we're going to drop whatever we're doing and switch it in an instant. But you have to, step up to the plate, so to speak, and be able to meet that. You're talking sort of about the competition earlier. Like, you're dealing with high quality people. You got to be able to rise to that and really thrive with respecting each other, but also being able to say, I have something to add.
yeah, yeah. I appreciate that, and that's I think an important distinction. So, Brian, I'm hoping that you can help to maybe provide some perspective to challenges that some of my listeners and some of my clients have. So as we talked about pre-show, I'm working with people who are in the service space, agencies that are providing mental health services, social services, addiction prevention, populations that are incarcerated, and they're really doing high levels of heart work,
Sure.
and they're doing it generally with limited resources, and there's high turnover because there's a lot of burnout, and because our leaders aren't able to incentivize with big paychecks, a lot of them end up feeling really stuck, or helpless to really change or affect change on this dynamic that they're experiencing. What I'm hearing you say is that culture building, community building, is really the answer to that. My specific question to you is, when you are not in an entrepreneurial space where you get to make all the decisions and have a lot of autonomy and do whatever you see fit, how do you sort of create that sense of community? And what is the secret to letting people know that you care and that their ideas matter, and building this this buy-in that makes people want to stay?
So there's a lot baked into your question. So the first part, I think I kind of want to address it in multiple steps. So you talked about the burnout, right, and the turnover, and I don't want to kind of jump past that. I want to pause on that for a second. So it's really important to understand and check in on a regular basis with why you're doing what you're doing, right? And that's sort of at all levels. So, for instance, I have businesses, and coming from that background is a little bit different, but I know, and it's very clear, and I'll tell everyone on my team this, and I think they should feel the same way, that family is a higher importance in serving them than businesses, right? Okay, so what does that look like? Well, if somebody has a sick family member, and that could be at all kinds of levels, from they just got a cold to cancer or whatever, there's a certain level of support that needs to be there, because that's what I would want, right? Now,
Of course.
the other side of that is, okay, if I'm in business or I'm in a position in a nonprofit or helping out those that obviously are struggling in various capacities, and that doesn't support my core needs for my family and other parts of life, then you need to be aware of that misalignment early. You can't wait till it's the 10th time I told my kids I can't make it to their soccer game, right? Because at that point now you're at the point where you're breaking and it's too late. There's got to be a constant check-in to say, okay, this is what life is about for me. This is the purpose that I have, and that's being with my spouse, and that's being with my kids, and it's or whatever your dynamic is, and having that prioritization to understand that, okay, well, I can miss a soccer game here and there, but I need to have a life that supports these other things that matter. Because when you have that, for lack of a better word, balance, even though I think it's overused, then you can deal with stresses at a much higher level, because you realize, you know what, I can go to that downtime. I talked to my team about, I actually am a better leader because I coach 6 different teams for my kids. And when I'm doing that, I'm completely disconnected from what I do at work. Like, it doesn't cross my mind. I'm not thinking about it. And so it just kind of frees my mind. And then when I'm done, ideas come to me and things come to me that help me sort of refresh. And I think that's true in any type of organization, because that's just the way the mind works. That's the way our emotional, person works. And so that's kind of step one. If you want to avoid the burnout and you want to be happy where you are, you got to have those regular check-ins, but also be extremely clear at all levels of your life what's important. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so now that the second part, or you really have one question, but the second part that I'll try to address there is, okay, what does that look like in dealing with other people? Well, one, it's respecting that for them, right? That's like, it's a ridiculous idea to think that somebody else is going to care about my business as much as I do, right? And so you just have to be realistic that they just don't. I think you also have to be realistic that how much can I truly do? Is it to affect 1 million lives, or is it just to help one? And I think being a parent really put that into focus for me, that I could go out and do, whatever talks and speeches and meet with people and build businesses and so on, or I can just be there for my son or my daughter, and connect with them and help them. And it really helped me sort of realize that, man, maybe my grandiose ideas, not that they're not valuable, not that they're not useful or important, but where are they in the priority list? And can I take joy and satisfaction out of just helping that one person? And that's just a sense of, I know you've talked about the gratitude and the charity and the giving, that if I've given somebody today, and my wife's actually a much better example of this. She works at was a Title I school, so low income is probably the easiest way to say it, and just sees very difficult things on a daily basis. And I don't know that I personally could do that. Like, it's just so emotional at the things that she would see and experience. And it's certainly not for the pay. But knowing that you've made a difference in that one life, as difficult as it is, reflects back to, okay, well, why are you here and what's your purpose? When you're dealing with your other team members, when you're dealing with other people that are trying to build that culture, asking them the questions. Like, one really good question, and you have to ask this anonymously, is how happy are you at work? Sean A. Core did some really good research on this. There's a software called Tiny Pulse that we've been using for, basically as soon as it became available, but you could do it with any survey tool if you wanted to. Because the reality is, successful people are not happy. Happy people are successful. Sean A. Core's research and Happiness Advantage points that out. And so that's ubiquitous. Doesn't matter what kind of organization you're in. Heck, you can ask that to your family. How happy are you in our family? Because it's just part of the human nature that, once I'm happy, and that's going back to the community, that's showing somebody cares about me, do my opinions count, all these types of things, then I can be better at whatever it is I'm doing. And so if I'm in a leadership position and I don't understand that dynamic in my team, or I'm afraid to ask, which is probably more common when I talk to people in high stress situations, they don't want to know the answer. Because if I'm claiming to care about you and I know the answer is you're not happy and I don't do anything about it, I've now countered what I said. And it might be a lot of work up front, but long term, it certainly pays off to just be open, address those things, and get an understanding of what you can do better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you said earlier about, this idea of like family first being a core value, but is in actuality the organization supporting that? That can be a core value,
Sure.
but if you're not facilitating, the ability for someone to take time off to take care of a sick family member, then in fact, you're not upholding that core value. But what I'm struck by here, Bryan, is this idea that because you talked about these grandiose ideas that you have to affect millions and change, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs, myself included, have those sorts of visions.
Sure.
But what I hear you saying is, in fact, the route to get there, and perhaps not everybody has that, and the leaders who are listening to this podcast aren't necessarily wanting to do that, but arguably they want to help as many people as possible. The way to do that is to focus on the individuals, to focus on, in your case, whether it's your family or your individual team members, because when you do that, then you are empowering them to go and do, and building that team then becomes exponential. Then you can in fact have impact at the millions, or on a grand scale, because that seed that you've planted now is able to grow. So you're not doing it yourself, but you're creating an environment by caring that allows that to happen. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. So we did a retreat recently, and my whole team, we flew down to the Bahamas once a year because it's remote, just to kind of get together. This year's Bahamas, not always. And one of the things we did is reflect on, okay, what were you really proud of? Like, what is your accomplishment for the last year that you enjoyed? And mine is, as a leader, my greatest joy in that position is to see other people succeed, and in particular, do things better than I think I could do. Right? So if I'm growing a business or any organization, that should be what drives me as a leader. Not that I accomplished X, Y, or Z, or not that I showed a certain bottom line, and not because those things are important. Those are. Not because the statistics said, hey, we affected this many lives, which is all great, but it's because I empowered other people and I heard what they accomplished. And that to me should be most rewarding. And I would strongly suggest that anybody in a leadership position, if that's not how you're thinking about, hey, did I have a good day, month, quarter, year, because I saw people, I helped people on my team affect lives, then I think you're probably missing a lot of what it means to be a servant leader and to just be a leadership in general. The other thing I would add to that is, so we know that people that engage significantly with social media, doesn't matter how many followers they have can have a lot of those, they can have a lot of likes, they can have a lot of all these things, that they're actually lonely and they can be depressed, anxious, all of these things if they don't have real life relationships to go along with it. And so,
right.
We might have these grandiose ideas affecting millions of lives, and we put up these, amazing podcasts, and we're reaching millions of people, and we're getting those likes and views and whatever else. But if I'm not interacting with a person one-on-one where I can feel and see the result of that, it's a very shallow type of a relationship and understanding to who I'm affecting. And so I would just caution that it's not a, hey, let me go on LinkedIn or whatever and get a bunch of people to comment. It's if I can see the impact that I'm making in one person's life, in the real emotional feedback from them, that, man, I've never been treated this way before. And, another one that struck me recently, and this might not be applicable for all instances, but one of my newer team members came to me and was like, what struck me this past year when he was going around was that one of our other team members was on a cross-continent flight. She just was feeling stressed out, whatever, and couldn't make a meeting in the afternoon because she needed a massage. And he was like, I was just shocked because nobody cared. Like, nobody was like, dude, what's going on? And he said, I literally paused my audio and said to my partner, like, I can't believe that just happened. They just said she can go, like, and it was funny because he brought up 3 months after it happened. And I was like, dude, what are you talking? I don't even remember anybody asking. Like, it's just a non-event. It wasn't a big deal. Like, it didn't even register in my head. And that might not be exactly how you would, but if a team member that's burnt out is like, hey, my kid's play is this afternoon and I know I'm scheduled, but I'd really like to, and you don't find a way to help them get there, that's not showing, necessarily. And maybe you can't help them, but to empathize with them at the very least and say, wow, like, I really understand how tough this is for you. Not that, hey, this is your job and you got to show up and you got to be there. That's not the way to address that. At least show the compassion and empathy for it. Does that answer that question?
Well, and it does, and I think it. What's interesting is it doesn't sound like you're certainly not. No one's punching a time clock, and you're not looking over people's shoulder to really like keep them like working as a taskmaster. Yet it seems the feeling that I'm getting is that your team is highly productive.
Extremely.
Is that accurate?
Yeah. And so there are checks and balances, right? Like different reports and data that we look at to try and see what's going on. But the reality is when you're given that level of autonomy and control and respect, right, you don't want to lose that. And so you do feel compelled to do a good job and to make sure you're delivering. And it's not because somebody's micromanaging you. It's because you're getting to be what you want to be. Right? You're living out that own purpose, those talents and passions that you have. And man, why would you risk giving that up?
Yeah, it's huge. And I think respect is undervalued in the workplace as something that's necessary for people to have a real sense of satisfaction in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bryan, as we wrap up, I'm sort of reflecting on what you've shared today. I like some of the resources that you've talked about, and we'll include links to those in the show notes. In particular, the book "First Break All the Rules," and then that idea of really assessing anonymously assessing people's satisfaction in the workplace, and using Tiny Source you mentioned, I believe. What I'm kind of wrapping my mind around here is this idea, like you shared. It starts with love, and you really need to have that love for your team, for your employees, to think first about their, like, what is going to create good for them. And that certainly is, aligned with the core values, doing those check-ins with your why and honoring their why as well. What I want to sort of finish on here is a question about this idea of burnout or giving too much.
Sure.
I think that's often something that those who I'm working with have a challenge finding that balance. So, if you are arguably spending your time focused on loving everyone else at the sacrifice or to the detriment of yourself, then you're not practicing self-care, right? And then your wellness suffers. So how do we strike that balance? How do you love but not give too much?
Yeah, boundaries are part of love, right? Anybody that's, to choose a dramatic example, anybody that's a parent knows that it's not loving to let your kids go run out into the street, right? If your 3-year-old grabs the kitchen knife, it's not loving to say, yeah, that's fine. You go have your autonomy and go play with the knife, right? Like that's not what love is. Willing the good of another oftentimes means helping them in areas that they might not even be aware of. Now, personally, going back to your purpose and why you're there and so on, the other thing that I think a lot of people miss out on is if you're in knowledge work, so you're not paid to lift things, right? So your job is knowledge based. You have to understand that the brain doesn't function well after 8 hours, right? There's a lot of
No,
research on this.
six is kind of maxed for most people.
Yeah, well, I don't know that they found very few that could get past that effectively. Can you still
Yeah.
do repetitive work and things like that? Sure. But can you think and problem solve? No, you can't. And the other side of that is you can't even do it for 8 hours in a row, right? You need to understand that your brain has a limited capacity before it needs to recharge. And then you also need a significant amount of sleep. Like if you don't get your 7 to 9 hours of sleep is for most people, then the brain doesn't have a chance to literally, it's like cleaning itself out. That's a really basic way of explaining it, but then you're not going to be effective. So if you're saying, okay, I need to be really good at this position, I need to be empathetic and emotionally strong with people, but I'm working 60 hours and I'm not recharging by getting to sleep, and I'm not, taking time to relax. Like you're going to not be the loving person that you need to be. Right. That doesn't help anybody. There has to be boundaries that you're aware of and you state and you're willing to hold to for you and for others. Now, I think people sometimes will take advantage of those, but they'll take advantage of them if you're loving or not. Like that's just, that's the risk of being human, that people are not always going to be as receptive as you'd like them to. That doesn't mean you don't do it, because it's still the right thing to do. But you certainly need to be aware of the limitations that we all have. Because if not, you're just going to keep getting worse and eventually burn out, and you're not going to help the people you want to help. So, again, that goes back to checking into what are your priorities in life and making sure they're there. And man, anything beyond a 40-hour work week is tough if it's not purely physical working.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think, what I'm hearing is, and we know love without boundaries is not a positive relationship. And we need that in all aspects of our working relationships, with, regards to those we work with and the amount of time that we work or what we're asked to do. There needs to be, boundaries in place in order to maintain a healthy balance. It's really important.
And that's so more specific to the working environment. That's things like, hey, what is your job expectation? What were you hired to do? What have you been trained to do? And so if people aren't holding up to that and they're relying on you, or they're pushing off into some other team member or so on, right? Like that's not loving to just take on everybody else's stuff. That's not helping the situation at all. That has to be addressed, and that has to be done in a way of compassion. Obviously, you have to be reasonable about maybe why they're doing it and get understanding. But nonetheless, you just can't allow people to walk all over you or your other team members, and that's usually the bigger problem that you might not know about it. That's where that happiness question: how happy are you at work? If you love your job, but you have a soul-sucking team member, which we've all experienced that before. That can affect dozens of people, including those, the vulnerable ones that you're helping as clients, and being able to address those and sometimes remove them. It's just not a place where they can thrive. And if that's the case, the loving thing is to not force them into a place where they can't thrive. The loving thing to do is to let them go find that opportunity. And certainly you can help them, whether it's getting a new job or whatever, but it's not beneficial to anyone to just say, oh, well, we got to put up with anything because that's not love. That's not compassion. That's not caring. That's weakness. That's the opposite.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Bryan, I'm wondering if you have a final thought on something that leaders can do right now today to start to make this shift, to have change come to their culture, to bring in love, or to install, any of these approaches that you've talked about, what's something that they can do right now?
If I was going into any type of organization, a prison or something like that I'm not familiar with personally, I'm not an expert in, and was trying to figure out, okay, where are the cultural weaknesses? One, I would look and try to see if they have culture statements. So do you have a definition of what a good culture looks like, what a good culture fit? And then from there, I would look at tools like Tiny Pulse. It's the one we use, tinypulse.com. And I have no affiliation with them. I just like the tool because I think it's every quarter, it sends out a question that says, how happy are you at work? And then in between it asks other ones. And it's completely anonymous. And the feedback you would get from that, if you acted on it, would be phenomenal, particularly in a high stress environment, a burnout environment. And that's something that there is an investment there, but could be done pretty quickly and easily. You could do it internally, but you'd have to have the time and labor to kind of create the surveys and manage them and make sure they were anonymous and whatever. So it's usually not worth the time to do that. But that would be the first thing. The second thing is, you can email me if you don't want to read the book, the Marcus Buckingham book about the 12 questions. And I can send you the format that I've been using for over a decade with literally the 12 questions. And then I have a format of like what follow-up questions you have when you ask them. And the best way to think of it is, it's not, if you're on my team, Jacob, it's not me giving you a performance review. It's you finding out if I've built an environment for you to thrive. That's what the questions are determining. And if I haven't built an environment for you to thrive, well, that's not your fault. That's my fault. And so it kind of turns the whole performance review process on its own. And if you're afraid to ask those questions, well, that tells you a lot to begin with. So if I went into
There's your
a ton of resistance or an organization to, man, I don't want to ask these people if their opinions count at work. All right, well, then that tells a lot right there in itself. So those are the few things that I would consider: the Tiny Pulse, the 12 question surveys, and just understanding, do you even have culture statements? And if not, working on those.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I will email you for those questions. If you don't mind, I'd love to provide that as a resource to our listeners. I think that would add a lot of value for them.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, great. Bryan, what are you working on now? What are you working on next? What can people expect to see from you in the future?
Wow, that's so. I have several businesses that, always doing digital marketing with my company, Optimize Marketing. We generate leads for local service businesses. So certainly, if you're in that world and we could help, certainly we could do that. I mentioned that I spent a lot of time coaching my kids and investing in theirs. So you can certainly expect to see me out in the soccer field and the basketball court, helping them out.
Excellent.
And then if you wanted to stay in touch or kind of get some of the feedback as I'm learning and sharing, you can find me on LinkedIn. And so try to post on there on a weekly basis with some of the new research that I find. I read about 40 books this year, and so I like to share what I find on there. And if it's helpful for you, great.
Fantastic. Bryan, thank you so much for your time and, more importantly, your insights and your knowledge. We really appreciate you sharing them.
Absolutely. I appreciate it very much as well.
Absolutely.